Hello and welcome to this video on the female characters in the play Hamlet, and namely we're talking about Gertrude and we're talking about Ophelia. They are the two main and only really female characters in the play. And before I begin, this is not going to be a positive video about the female characters in the play, I'm afraid. Shakespeare does not portray females in a positive light, really, in this play. He has faced criticism for that for hundreds of years, because of course Shakespeare wrote around about 400 years ago now, and for those 400 years women have not been impressed by how he has portrayed them, and this play is no different. Because let's start with Gertrude and let's just take a look at her character. Before we do that, let's have a quick look at the questions that have come up in the past on the female characters, because the examiners do like to ask character questions on female characters. You see, last time Hamlet came up, there was a question on whether female or male characters were better presented in this play. Interesting question. Gertrude came up in 2012 and Ophelia in the second questions. Not really anything in 2011. Ophelia and her relationship with Laertes came up in 2005. And Gertrude, do you have any sympathy for her in 2002? So they do come up quite a lot, so it's very important that we look at them. So back to Gertrude again. Let's start with her. What's the basic info we know about her? Well, she's the widow of King Hamlet. So King Hamlet was killed by Claudius, of course, and she was married to him at the time. She's the mother of Prince Hamlet, so he is their child. He is King Hamlet's and Gertrude's son. She is the Queen of Denmark. Of course, Queen kind of hints that she has power. Of course, back then, the female of the king-queen relationship would not have had much power, although you did have powerful queens at the time, such as Queen Elizabeth in England, but obviously not in Denmark, because Queen Gertrude is quite a weak ruler, if you could even call her a ruler. Here's the negative aspect to Gertrude. She was having an affair with Claudius while she was married. Okay, now that is a game changer. Because back in the 1600s, and even now, married women who have an affair are kind of viewed very dimly in society. Probably more dimly, don't ask me why, I don't know, more dimly than married men who have an affair. I don't know why, sometimes that's perception of society. So she's never going to win. She's never going to be a hero in this play. Seen as how weak. If you have an affair, you're perceived as being weak. Okay, you have no integrity, no honesty, and you're betraying the sacrament that is marriage. She, in fairness to her, she is a caring woman. Okay, but she's dominated by the men in her life. So Claudius, her new husband, Hamlet, her son, and Polonius, who technically is her employee. They all dominate her. They all tell her what to do. So it's not a great start, is it? Let's look at her traits. What's the first trait we could say about her? Well, she's very weak. She's a weak person and a shallow person. She was having an affair, after all, with Claudius, while her first husband was still alive. She speaks of her own weaknesses, her black and grained spots, when Hamlet confronts her. So she essentially admits to it. She admits to having an affair. She admits to being full of sin, to having black and grained spots. So in other words, she admits to having that affair with Claudius. Within a month of King Hamlet dying, she married Claudius. Now, I know people can argue that, look, a country needs a king. So it was in Gertrude's interest to remarry. And the sooner the better, because there are people that want to invade Denmark, such as Norway. You know, King Fortinbras wants to invade. But she has a son. She has a 30-year-old son who could just as easily have become king. and there would have been no problems. But yet she marries within a month, even less than a month, of her husband dying. And that is another big no-no, and the audience would not have looked on that with much sympathy. What else can we say? Sorry, the screen moved there. She seems to have stopped grieving for her dead husband within a month. So it's one thing to get married within a month, but that doesn't mean you don't feel emotionally bad still. No, not Gertrude. She isn't grieving. She scolds Hamlet for continuing to grieve. We see that in the second scene in Act 1. Why seems it so particular with thee? Why are you so bothered about it, Hamlet? Why are you bothered about your father dying? Can you not get over it, please? That's not good. What else can we say? She's very submissive. Somebody who's submissive means that they're not a leader. It's the opposite of being a leader. Her husband Claudius is completely in charge. She obeys him always, even to the detriment of her only son. She goes along with his plan to sneakily find out his true motives by acting as bait, with Polonius listening in. After Hamlet reveals the truth about King Hamlet's murder, why did she do nothing? Okay, she seems totally under the control of Claudius. So Hamlet basically lays it out for her. He says, Claudius killed your first husband, my father. And she doesn't really do anything about it. She still goes back to Claudius and just does the dutiful wife thing. And that's not really good enough. Okay, that's not acceptable if we're to look upon her as a good character. She's not. She's weak. She agrees with every decision Claudius makes, never questioning him. This is despite the fact that she has been queen far longer than he has been king. She was there for years. So Hamlet's 30. So she's on the throne possibly up to 30 years as queen. But yet Claudius comes in, and within a few days, he's in charge. That's not the actions of a strong person. So she's very submissive. Okay, she's not a leader. She's weak. What else? In fairness to her, she has some redeeming qualities. She is a loving person. Despite her obvious failings, Gertrude clearly loves Hamlet, her son. She is anxious about his depression at the start of the play, and seems genuinely concerned about his behaviour as the play progresses. We get the feeling that she agrees to go along with Claudius and Polonius's scheming because she thinks they have his best interests at heart. So we can say that about her. Now, she's too stupid to realise that they don't have his best interests at heart. They're trying to get rid of him. But she just doesn't have the intelligence to see that. Anyway, focus on the positives for a moment. She is loving. She cares for Ophelia. At Ophelia's funeral, she is the person who scatters the flowers on her grave. Okay, she does care for Ophelia. Now, is that because Ophelia is a fellow female and she's worried about her own fate? If Ophelia is so willing to take her own life, is that what will come of her? I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit mean on her. Also, she shows her love for Hamlet by drinking to his success in his fencing match with Laertes. Now, ironically, that leads to her own death, because Claudius has poisoned that cup. But the fact that she drank to Hamlet's success suggests that she does care for Hamlet. Okay, so overall a kind of a mixed pattern for Gertrude. She's loving, she's submissive, she's weak and shallow. In general, she's just not a character that you could very much admire, is she? Not really. What about Ophelia? A little bit less critical of her, but she still has her weaknesses. She's Polonius' daughter, she's Laertes' brother, and she's kind of like the girlfriend, on-off girlfriend of Hamlet, although he seems to hold all the cards, to be honest. She's very dutiful and obedient. She does what she's told. She's dominated by all the men in her life. Polonius, Laertes, and Hamlet all control her in some way. Laertes advises against her seeing Hamlet again, and so does Polonius. And Hamlet sort of mockingly just leads her down the garden path, for want of a better expression. She's naive. She doesn't have the intelligence or the confidence to see that she is being used by her father and Claudius to see what Hamlet is hiding. Her innocence causes her to become completely overwhelmed at her father's murder at the hands of Hamlet. So again, that's not the actions of a strong character. Like, we can feel sympathy towards Ophelia because she's so naive and she's so weak-willed that, and she's so loving, which I'll talk about in a minute, that she just becomes overwhelmed towards the end of the play, and she takes her own life. So obviously we'd feel sympathy about that. But they are not the actions of an admirable character. You cannot admire Ophelia for doing that. She has no inner strength. As soon as things start to get tough, she crumbles. And when you consider how Gertrude had been portrayed, and when you look at Ophelia, you begin to see that Shakespeare does not portray women in a very good light in this play. Because the two main female characters in this play are not very admirable, are they? Now, what's good about her? Well, she's loving, okay? She's an open book, okay? What she says, she means. She seems to genuinely love Hamlet, and indeed her family. She does what her father asks her, and she listens to Laertes. This love, however, proves her undoing, as she takes her own life after losing her mind when her family starts to fall apart. So, if we just zoom out there for a second, because I've written a few general things about female characters, because remember I referenced that question that came up in 2017 about female characters in this play, and I'm sorry to tell you that it's not very positive. Female characters, both of them, Ophelia and Gertrude, are submissive. They live in the shadows of their husbands, sons, brothers, other men. They're weak. They do what they're told. They have affairs. They take their own lives. They are emotional rather than reasonable. Okay? They don't seem to have the same level of intelligence as the men, the male characters in this play. Now, this is how Shakespeare portrays them. This is not me saying this. This is how they come across in the play. They are not portrayed in a positive light. So if a question at all came up about female characters and how they are portrayed in Hamlet, you would have to be critical of Shakespeare, because the female characters in this play are very one-dimensional. Okay, they don't have much depth. Gertrude has a little bit more depth now than Ophelia, okay, but she is tricked. Both of them are just tricked, conned, used, abused, and spat out at the end of the play. And we don't really feel any sympathy for them. And that's the biggest fault in their characters.